So welcome everybody to our monthly series, The Science of Remote. So in this series, the goal of this is to really build a community resource and have really candid, fun conversations with people on the front lines to talk about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that this new world of remote work presents. So today I'm joined by some people who I'm really excited to introduce, and we'll jump into that in just a quick second. So that you can have an expectation as to what we'll cover, in a second we'll let the panelists introduce themselves. And then we'll jump into the meat of the topic. So we're going to talk about something that's certainly a big challenge in onboarding, this idea of, how do you get teammates up to speed? And this isn't necessarily just new teammates or new hires. This can be someone that's new to a project, or how you can ramp up a working group on something. We're going to talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities for collaboration and knowledge sharing. Then we're going to jump into one of probably the most interesting topics on the agenda today, which is this idea of how do you kind of put together a remote culture? And of course, many of us have experienced culture in quotation marks, which often looks like somebody just putting a ping pong table in an office, or allowing for a happy hour on a Wednesday. We all know it's more than that. We know it's the human connection and the development that you build between people. So we'll talk a little bit about how that works and things we've seen that might be worth sharing. Last and not least, we'll talk about how you build opportunities for collaboration and personal development in a remote dynamic. Of course, it's difficult to pick up on kind of little hidden context clues when you're not necessarily sitting in the same building together. So that's what we'll be jumping into. So without further ado, let's let the panelists introduce themselves going down the line here. So Andrea, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for putting this together, Maxim, and great to be here with all of you, talking about this really important topic that's impacting all of us. So my background is that I joined Eightfold in February, so right before everything went remote. And Eightfold is a company that leverages AI to help enable the right career for everyone in the world. And when I joined as a talent insights manager, trying to leverage our platform and insights to identify the skills and potential of people across different workforces. And as COVID hit, though, I ended up transitioning into a role as program manager for the Talent Exchange. And we built the Talent Exchange on top of our existing talent intelligence platform to help match individuals who are looking for work with companies that are still hiring. And so it has been a great experience, lots of learning from being in a remote setting, since I'm actually based on the East Coast and the company and all my teammates are based on the West Coast. And it was also different from prior roles, where my prior experiences were within the financial services industry primarily, large corporations, and working in marketing roles as well as an equities trader. So there were a lot of shifts all at once, not the least being how we all have had to transition due to COVID. So I'm really excited to talk about kind of what I've learned, what the culture has been like here, and just learning from each other.
Excellent. Thanks, Andrea. Jose, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. And this is great to get a chance to connect with folks from all over the spectrum. And thanks for hosting this topic, Maxim. So my name's Jose Colchao. I've been at Twitter for 5.5 years, actually originally from the East Coast, but primarily in the digital marketing space for most of my career. We joked about this a little bit when we caught up yesterday, Maxim, but it's ironic that I used to spend most, probably on a weekly, if not bi-weekly basis on the road, on planes. So the change has been pretty drastic on the day-to-day, but I think we, from a technology standpoint and from a culture standpoint, have a lot of companies have certainly put themselves in a position to adapt to this in a decent way. And I think we'll be able to talk through a little bit of the way that Twitter's done that with the group here today.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Chika, thrilled to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Maxim, thanks for inviting me. And I'm definitely thrilled to have this conversation with everybody on this panel. A little bit about myself. My background's in product management. Out of, I think, many of the professions that are affected by remote work, it's probably product management. We're very high context, high touch, very meetings oriented individuals, and a lot of the sub conversations that happen are unfortunately dried up as a result of remote work, and it's transforming. So I'll definitely talk about that in my work. I do that by day. I manage. I work as a product consultant. I work with everything from Fortune 500 companies all the way down to startups, and help them think about their product strategy and building products of value internally or for consumers. That is one hat. On the other hand, I also teach product management at General Assembly. So there's definitely a change, a transition that we're going through at General Assembly as well, shifting to fully remote classes that I can definitely speak to as well. And General Assembly has done a really good job so far of making that happen, and I can definitely speak to that. And then I also, when I'm not trying to sleep, I also do investment and advisory work at TipHub, which I founded almost 6 years ago. Wow, time flies. It's around the time Maxim and I met. Yeah, so I found it around that time. And TipHub works with early stage companies at the intersection of impact and technology in Africa. And we work with, we invest, we advise, we co-build, we do a little bit of everything and help those companies scale. So I can talk a little bit more about it, how that is formed my perspective on remote work. Looking forward to taking all these hats off and unpacking these hats and talking more about my experiences.
Fantastic, thank you. And last and certainly not least, we have Liz. Thanks for joining us, Liz.
Hi everybody, Liz Kuka from Digital Finance Group, where I've been for the past 2 years now. And DFG.group, what we do is we're a bit of a hybrid firm. We both do venture investments and run 2 crypto hedge funds, and we'll launch a digital asset exchange later this year. And so my role in all of that, and we run a startup accelerator, how could I forget? And so my role in all of that is on the sourcing side, diligence, term sheets, managing our portfolio companies, events, which it means community and education. And then last, I've been putting around 30% of my time or so on this new project, which is the launch of the digital asset exchange, which it's a new project, but it's honestly been a work in progress since I started. So it's been about 2 years to finally get it to where it's at today. It's pretty difficult to launch a regulated exchange. We're based in California for the most part. The office is in San Francisco. However, we're very distributed. I'm in Southern California now. We have folks in New York, folks in Canada and Asia. So we're really all over the world, and generally are going between 3 to 4 different time zones. And similar to Jose, I was also traveling bi-weekly or monthly throughout the country and globally. So it's quite a difference to actually be home and not moving constantly for once. And so excited to share what that experience has been like with everybody.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks so much, Liz. So we'll jump into the discussion now, which I'm really kind of excited to light into. And of course, in these intros, it's probably quite clear to our audience that there's a lot of time zones to juggle as well between this group. So I think it's safe to say, we're all kind of doing the black belt of remote work in a lot of cases. So something I'd love to kind of jump straight into is this idea of the onboarding challenges. Andrea, you and I kind of talked about this a little bit, and I think you had kind of a really interesting experience kind of getting some new interns up to speed recently. And we talked about kind of some of the challenges of getting them working with frameworks, getting them familiarized with people. And I'd love to kind of hear a bit of your thoughts on that, and then we can build the conversation off of that, and what does it look like to effectively get people up to speed, introduce them to the company, introduce them to the challenges, get them educated on the resources available to them so that they can work effectively?
Yeah, so I think that there's there's on the one hand, getting the people who are joining the company fresh out of university, or maybe they're still in school and they haven't had prior work experience. I think there's one kind of framework that should be provided to them. And then for individuals who are joining the company who do have prior work experience, I think there's another framework for them. The reason I make the distinction is because on the one hand, for let's say 2020 grads or even interns, they are used to having structure. And in the traditional world, when we went to work, we went into a workplace, we had a manager, we were able to see the people around us and where they were sitting, and we were able to get to know them, maybe cross paths with them in the kitchen. And that's not possible now. And also the other thing is it's not possible to say, okay, this is your work schedule quite as much, because people are talking about how work from home enables so much flexibility. And so I think that what's important, and I learned kind of the hard way, is that for people who aren't used to having that structure, aren't aware of, okay, what times do I need to be on in order to be able to get my work done with other people that I'm reliant on, versus when can I be off and get things done later on my own terms. It's, I realized that when I had given my own interns kind of open schedule of saying, communication is what matters to me a lot. And just, let me know on Slack. Don't email me because I'm not going to get to it as fast. Let me know on Slack if you need something. If I'm not replying to Slack, here's my number and call me. Here are the projects to work on. And because I know that you're getting up to speed, kind of you tell me the timelines. The reason I did that was partially a function of myself feeling like I've had micromanagers in the past and not wanting to be one. But I think that if you're starting out and if you are in this environment that doesn't have much structure, actually giving them structure to say, okay, your schedule for the first 2 weeks are going to be 9 to 5 or 9 to 6. And these are the projects that I'd like you to work on. And then these are the general deadlines that I'd like. And these are people who you would likely work with, and try to schedule meetings for them that way. And then as those 2 weeks come up, giving them the ability to check in and say, here's how I'm doing, here's how I've progressed, here's who I've met, etc. And the reason why providing those introductions up front is so important is because otherwise people are going to arrive and not, know who they are. People will know of them. And just, it has to be more than just an email to the whole organization saying, here's who's joined. For people who have joined with experience, I think that it's like, you don't have to provide that same structure of the 9 to 5, but I think kind of giving some confidence and knowing or hoping that people will be trustworthy, be communicative, be engaged, but the structure for them should be about really making sure that they know who they're working with across every single department, and kind of who different point people are. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if there's one common theme that I always like to discuss on remote enablement, I think it's the importance of intentionality. It's like fewer things can happen by accident, when you don't have people in the same building. So, as you kind of alluded to, which I think is such an important point, when you're in an office together, you might be able to bump into someone while you're, filling up your water bottle, at the water fountain, and build that relationship ultimately. And that might become important for cross-team collaboration. It's a lot harder in remote. So as leaders and managers, or even, as individual contributors, it's important for us to be thinking about how can you build that connective tissue, and how can you kind of build that a kind of relationship map within the organization to make things happen. And Jose, if you're comfortable with me kind of picking on you a little bit, you kind of discussed something pretty interesting with me the other day, about kind of putting together events and, connecting people to each other and getting them to learn more about each other personally. And I'm wondering kind of how that's influenced your guys' work over at Twitter, as far as how have you been able to keep people engaged? How have you been able to get people kind of chatting with each other when, they might be in a potentially kind of siloed team?
Yeah, no, happy to speak to that a little bit. As I mentioned, I spent a lot of time traveling, and a lot of my travels had to do with presenting and pitching and, kind of addressing a bigger forum of individuals in person. And part of the reason you do that in person is because you want to have that more personalized attention. So kind of address that issue in kind of the new world. A lot of what we've talked about, both when we do sort of like internal like team, we had like a coffee chat this morning. We just have a regular weekly with our broader team to stay close. But when I interact with clients, it's actually kind of about stepping away from the formality of the work and maybe adding an activity or adding kind of a fun question or showcasing something about like real world current events, or even just discussing like some of the challenges of maybe parenting at home while working, right? Like just having a bit more of the human side and giving people something to sort of participate in, as opposed to just a formal like, hey, okay, what do we have to do for the agenda today? So that's something I would just advise in general, and something that we found has had some successes. We have these kind of formal meetings, but we probably spend the first 10 minutes not discussing that. Maybe it's, kind of a silly prompt, like what's been your favorite binge series so far? What's something that you have eaten or prepared that maybe you wouldn't have planned for? Just like little things, and to the point that Andrea made around, especially for new individuals and folks that are maybe not too familiar with the team, it's an opportunity for them to share a little bit and participate in a lightweight way.
Absolutely.
And it adds that human side that like we're all in it together. And I think that sort of fact that we all kind of know that exact feeling and can address that with other individuals helps.
Yeah, I think that's such an important element of all of this. It's something I always try and personally catch myself on, is like on Slack or any of these kind of internal messaging systems. It can be so easy to kind of suddenly accidentally treat people like they aren't people. And what I mean by that is you can suddenly just come at someone out of the blue and say like, hey, what's going on with this project? Or can you give me this information? And you get rid of all of like the, hey, good morning, how are you doing? What's going on with you today? And I've really worked to kind of cook that into my own routine and share it with others, is like, first off, like, good morning, how are you doing? Like
Really?
anything stressing you out today, before you kind of create this like just input output relationship with your colleagues. So I love that that's something you guys are doing, is kind of finding a way to loosely structure in this kind of personal dynamic that makes it feel like a human experience again.
Totally. And an easy one is just like, I don't know, especially if you're leading a meeting or a session or something, almost just starting with something that's different, like a funny video or a cute video, or among all being bombarded with sort of negativity and stresses and things like that. Sometimes it's like that little moment that you have an opportunity to sort of guide and kickstart the conversation in a light way.
Absolutely.
I like the fact also that you mentioned having like these weekly check-ins, where there are companies that are used to having weekly check-ins, but I feel like it's really important if it's been bi-weekly or monthly, to make it weekly. And also, I feel like a lot of companies highlight the new employees rather than kind of having highlights on all employees, or maybe in each check-in, 1 to 2 people say, here is what I have been experiencing at home. Here's what projects I've been working on. Here's what I've been learning. Here are skills that I use and how you can leverage me. And that way it's not just the new people, but also existing people who can learn from each other and figure out how to leverage each other in a way that like makes sure everyone's true potential is coming out.
I think that's such a great point. Yeah, the something, Andrea, you and I chatted about a little bit, which I think is such an interesting concept in the onboarding discussion too, is this idea that in a remote setting, you kind of have to consider that you might have to re-onboard people or periodically onboard people again who may have been at the company for a while, with the absence of some of this kind of like osmosis context. It can be easy for team members to kind of lose sight of like, yeah, how has the marketing team evolved? Have they added anybody new? Are they doing anything different? Is the message changed? Are we emphasizing something new? Is there some whiz-bang feature of the product that, me being on the sales team, I might not have noticed immediately? So I think, coming back to that intentionality, like find these ways to cross-pollinate between teams, find ways to develop these relationships, find ways for the knowledge sharing to be, not by accident, but by design, I think so critical for sure.
A small thing that I've noticed that probably a lot of people have adopted, but maybe it hasn't, and it doesn't always happen with some of the client discussions, is just using the video function. like sometimes people will hide behind just like the phone call, and again, like comfort and culture and all those things. But if culturally forward, like you're making that intentional personalization of a video and having that time, and like that's just like a small nuance, I think, that in general has been a positive experience, and something that I would advocate for if it's not something that maybe has been historically implemented by an organization or by a team. Like it's a little bit, you know, maybe your hair looks a little funny, maybe you're not dressed, maybe there's a pet or a kid in the background, but like that human side of it, that personalization helps bridge that gap that we're not getting from that, you know, day-to-day interaction.
I completely agree. Yeah, it's something I've talked about with quite a few people, is this idea of, you know, how important video is at this point, you know, and it's much easier to be distracted if you're just on the phone, you know, laying on the sofa with your headphones. You know, you might be, you know, browsing the web or something, and, you know, I think there's like that underlying, you know, paranoia or anxiety people have that maybe like someone isn't listening or maybe someone isn't engaged. And, you know, I think video does a lot to solve that, and it of course does a lot to kind of connect people to one another and, you know, get a better read on body language and, you know, reactions. You know, I think the flip side to that, which I think is equally important to always keep in mind, is you know, which meetings don't need video, you know, and which videos can it be optional, you know, and which videos should you kind of push everyone to just be audio only. You know, I've certainly encountered a lot of people who feel kind of burned out on occasion, where they're like, another video, cool, and, you know, it's exhausting. And so I think it's always that balance. So I always try and be kind of really thoughtful and prescriptive, you know, especially with internal meetings, you know, of saying right off the bat, like, hey, I'm not going to turn on my video. You can turn yours off if you'd like, you know, because we're just kind of having a brainstorm or something. Video is unnecessary. Or on the flip side, kind of setting the expectation right away, you know, it's like, hey, let's do video to really kind of have a more kind of personal meeting today. I think it's very crucial for sure.
Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, Elizabeth, just being the other female on this in this conversation right now, I wonder kind of what the take is in general about male colleagues who like have children. I mean, I don't have kids, I don't have a dog. It makes it much easier to work from home for sure. But I have enjoyed seeing my male colleagues with their kids in the background, because I feel like it kind of humanizes colleagues a bit more. It also helps, I think, with what our society still is struggling with around the role of both parents, like the father and the mother. And there still is a bit of a perception that it's up to the mother to take care of kids. And I've heard lots of stories about like it being harder for mothers to work from home. But I've really enjoyed seeing fathers take that responsibility too. And it kind of gives me hope about the future landscape, about like gender equality. And so I don't know, Elizabeth, if you kind of noticed the same or feel a similar reaction, but I've enjoyed that.
Well, thanks for bringing it up, because I certainly find it very important. I also don't have kids. I have a cat, and he just walked by across my lap, and thankfully not high enough, or maybe not thankfully high enough for everyone to see. And most of my colleagues also don't have children, or if they do, they're mostly grown up. So I haven't had too many experiences with kids in the background, but I agree, in general, being able to humanize the connection and the conversations is always really nice. And similar to what Jose had mentioned, like we try to make it a little bit more silly, and I think you mentioned it as well, and then try to take time for each other, even if it's just a few minutes at the top of a meeting, to talk about the weekend or something that's going on, something that you're learning, something to break up the monotony.
Absolutely.
And once again, I think it's you know, children in Zoom calls are actually we've you know, in various companies that I work with, we've kind of used that as a, you know, they're the extra employee on the team, you know. So there was one example. I was in a meeting, and you know, my manager's son ran into his office, and you know, we joked around, oh, Anthony didn't like that suggestion, you know. And so it's kind of a way to bring I think one of the things that we missed when we started, you know, kind of creating our physical working environment is that addition of family. and that addition of family into the office and to the overall experience. And I think with this, with video now, and with this, with these, with this remote experience, the remote experience we're having, there's an opportunity for a lot of that, a lot of partners coming into play, children coming into play. And I think that, companies should lean into that more, because there's definitely a lot of opportunity there.
I completely agree. Yeah, and I think, it's certainly kind of a common thread that I think we've landed upon with all of this, is just like the importance of remembering, like, we're all just people with real lives behind us, and embracing the fact that someone's going to have a dog or a kid in the background on occasion. And I think it's so important as managers or colleagues to not make that an awkward thing for people. I've run into the same thing, where one of my colleagues has some young boys, and one of them periodically will come in and interrupt a call, and I'll embrace it and laugh about it with him, rather than sit there awkwardly or anything like that, because it's like, you're a complete person. Your life is not just work, and who you are as a totality is what makes you valuable for the company. So let's not make it weird. I think it's so important.
Chika, I really appreciate that you mentioned that. Despite not having kids at home, I think it's important, and it's probably a really good piece of advice for anyone listening in who does have like a larger family, in the home with them every day, to remember that it's a new context for probably everybody, and to help the family feel included. It doesn't mean probably to sit with you for the entire meeting, but to pop in every now and again isn't the end of the world. And I think that's nice to help create that inclusiveness within the family environment.
Absolutely. And on the onboarding discussion, I think another thing that I feel is to a certain extent under discussed, and I'm curious, if you guys have kind of seen anyone do this really well, or if you kind of had any breakthroughs for yourself. But I think like the importance of learning how to work remotely well, from like a very kind of tactical perspective, I certainly kind of pride myself on being excellent at it, like having like a good headset, like having a good virtual background, like having a good camera set up, and getting kind of up to speed with it, hardwiring your computer in. I'm curious to kind of hear about kind of how you guys, what struggles have you run into, what breakthroughs have you had as far as like kind of setting yourselves up for success at home, like.
Yeah, happy to. So I'd say that in terms of personal setup, I mean, I got this chair when I started working. When I joined in February, the first thing I ordered was this chair, because my old one just gave me back pain. Then it took some time for my boyfriend and I to figure out what our setup was. First, my desk was out in the living room and he had the office. And then we ended up swapping because I had so many more calls in the day. And still, sometimes I can hear him in here even with the door closed, just when he's on the phone. But that's just kind of part of being in the same environment. And yeah, knowing kind of that there are other people there with you, and colleagues respecting that. In terms of my work setup, I am actually so thankful about the environment that I'm in, because I feel like the company just already had a culture of certain pillars, like extreme ownership, which means that, everyone's responsible for something. And it's not like it's someone else's job. We're all responsible for building this company and building our products and platform. And so because we had that, I think it just makes a world of difference when you're working remotely, because everyone is kind of chipping in to do something and saying like, oh, I could do that. No, I could do that. Don't worry. And like helping each other out. I think also our communication structure was really impressive, which goes along with respect for each other. Because if I'm sending a message and I'm not receiving a response back for hours and I need a response, then it just ends up introducing lag into the system and makes it really hard to stay productive. Whereas in prior roles, I could definitely think of the jobs and titles I had when like the only way to get things done was to walk over to someone. And so thinking right now where I'm sitting, if I was still in those jobs, I don't know how I would get things done. And it would just impact my morale, my productivity, my impression of myself as well, in terms of like, why aren't people responding to me? And so I think that extreme ownership, communication, respect, and transparency like transparency about what you're all working on so that people can chip in and offer help however they can and say like, oh, what else can I like step up to the plate for if I have capacity to do? So I feel quite fortunate, and I'm definitely part of that like 60% of people who look forward to remote work continuing, but it's a function, I think, of that foundational culture. The thing I've struggled with though, is I still make mistakes on who I'm sending messages to sometimes. Because I don't know always like, oh, who is the person that I need to talk to for this particular thing versus that particular thing. And I think part of the difficulty of it is I'm a visual learner. And so for me, even prior work, I think about the floor, and it was open floor plans. I think who sat where and in which departments were clustered together. So I wonder if that's something that could be like created where companies have like a virtual floor and they say, okay, this is the engineering team, this is the product team, this is marketing, this is sales, because otherwise it's kind of hard to know who sits where.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Happy to chime in on this one as well. I think I agree with everything Andrea just mentioned. And additionally, and this is probably an obvious one for a lot of folks, but I think health and wellness is a huge component of this, at least for me. And being at home and being a bit of a worker bee type and having early morning calls sometimes, like I'm on a call at 6:30 in the morning, I'm on a call at 7, pretty early. And it's easy to let time slip away. Now it's 4, 5, 6, and like you've done a pretty long day. It's been 10 or 12 hours now. And so breaking up the day, going for a walk, going for a run, going for a quick hike, and making that time in the middle of the day at 2 p.m. when I know I have no meetings. I have my phone on me in case someone needs to text or call, always being available, but also making sure that I'm taking time for myself. And that could even be like a meditation session, going outside and just getting some fresh air, whatever it is. Just I think for everyone who's listening in is to remember to take time for yourself and your health and well-being, as I do think it improves your performance. And I don't think that's the reason to do it. I think you should do it for yourself, but it does. And for me, at least, it certainly helps with attitude and energy and wanting to be there and wanting to work with everybody when I have that good spirit and good attitude.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Something I want to kind of jump into is, you know, kind of let's lean into kind of the culture conversation a little bit here. And I think, as I kind of mentioned, you know, as we were introducing the topic earlier, you know, it obviously goes beyond, in a physical setting, it goes beyond just having a ping pong table or, you know, beanbag chairs. You know, it's how the company develops a personality. It's how people collaborate with each other. You know, it's the expectations that people have on, you know, how they can feel about the company and how the company works with them. And Liz and Jose, in our conversations, each of you kind of brought up kind of some pretty interesting things that I'd love to kind of share with the audience. Liz, you talked about kind of this kind of fun technical project that you got to do in your free time to learn more about kind of the engineering side of the business. And Jose, you talked about this kind of really cool concept you guys put together for the client and partner kind of happy hour, and how you kind of logistically have been putting that together. So I'd love for you guys to talk a little bit about that and share kind of what that's been like. And yeah, let's jump into that.
Yeah, so what Maxim's referring to is a Raspberry Pi node. So in the blockchain space, a lot of people run nodes, and I finally have a kit so I can run my own Ethereum Classic node, which is pretty exciting. And what I was sharing with Maxim is that in the office, when I have back-to-back meetings, your colleague taps you on the shoulder for feedback, someone randomly drops by the office because they're in financial district in San Francisco, right? And they're down the street. Like there's these constant like positive interruptions, or even walking back and forth between different office buildings to have meetings. It just all takes time. And working from home, you know, having at 4:30 p.m. or 5 p.m. at the end of the day to work on a project that's going to help me with my understanding of the technical side of the space. It also helps me be able to educate and communicate what these like more difficult concepts are to grasp to our broader community. Is really a value add for everybody. And it's something I probably wouldn't have done in the office, just because as the day starts, again, as it gets impacted, you're commuting home on the other side of San Francisco, or now I'm in Southern California, but then it would take an hour, even within San Francisco. So when everything starts to compile, you're just, oftentimes for me at least, or going to a networking event, is you just start cutting in on those extra pretty fun projects that are both great for me and for the business.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I can just touch on a little bit of what you discussed, Maxim. So as I mentioned, I work with clients on a pretty regular basis. Um, and part of that relationship management and collaboration is, entertaining in some capacity, whether that's dinner or maybe it's a basketball game, um, or as I mentioned, even sometimes it's just something as simple as coffee. So kind of thinking about how do you maintain that personal connection and sort of that it's not always just about business. One of the a couple of different concepts we've done, but one of the ones we've recently just planned for was kind of just creating like a happy hour and a trivia session with a bunch of the folks we work with. So we just actually just sent like everybody, we said, hey, look, check out this site. We'll send you like whatever like mix kit you'd like. So everyone should be getting their mix kits this morning, actually, for an event we have this afternoon. And then later today, we'll have everybody prepare their drinks and kind of do like a trivia session. So that's something that's like, it's just logistics. It's just a little bit of planning, but it's something that can be implemented for like your team. If you're a manager or director and you're trying to do something fun and different for your team. But I think the call out with any of these types of things is that the intention and participation can be kind of tricky to get buy-in. So if you are managing or trying to, create this little moment, it's about making it very easy for participation, because once you have people bought in, very easy. But asking for a lot of different details like, hey, go make a drink, go do this thing, that can be tricky. So thinking about fun ways that lean into what, your community or the folks you work with like to do. Maybe it's a cooking class. Maybe it's, maybe it's like, hey, like these are some favorite board games, right? Like it doesn't really matter. It's more of like adapting to what your team and an organization or potentially your clients like, and then building an experience that again makes it super easy for participation.
I think that's such a cool idea for sure. One that I'm planning to leverage myself. Chica, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I'm definitely taking notes on that, because we're definitely going to have to be sending mix. If you can let me know who you used for that, so we can kind of try to replicate that in our company. But taking my product management hat on and putting my investor advisor hat on, as I work with companies that are starting to build from the ground up their culture, I always tell them that it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Andrea and Maxim, be deliberate. And it doesn't have to be, the events that, drive it's not necessarily the events that'll drive, what your culture is all about. It'll be the really small things. So language, how do you all, speak life into each other's professional capability? What's your position on, the ability to constantly learn and iterate and get better as individuals, as an organization? What kind of relics do you have that help you be a better organization? So relics could be like a weekly all hands meeting. It could be like a water hole Slack channel. Where are the lulls in the middle of the day? What do you do when things are challenging? Kind of just thinking about all of these little micro moments that you have, that you're going to have, and how are you going to, as an organization, kind of build the cultural pieces to manage those things, so that it becomes almost second nature when these challenges and these opportunities come up. And of course, your culture will be driven by your values at the end of the day. And so I know there's a lot of companies that, kind of scoff at a lot of managers and leaders scoff at doing what they consider soft work to understand, those values and the mission. But we're finding now that the companies that really invested their time and energy into really building out what that really means, and it's really permeated and made their organization, and specifically their culture, very flexible to this shift to the remote culture, the remote experience. So I always say, events are important, but you also have to look granularly on the micro situations that happen. How are we talking to each other? How are we working through challenges together? And how are we, figuring out, what the future looks like as an organization?
Absolutely. No, I think it's a really good call out that I think I would agree is underappreciated and underestimates its power is the power of these values. And to dig a layer deeper on that, my view on them is ultimately, if you're operating excellently as a remote organization, it requires that you set people up for autonomous success. And I think to get people to work autonomously effectively, they need to understand like, what are the frameworks and principles with which I operate? And to kind of share with our audience and with the panel, a few organizations that I think do an unbelievably good job of this. I think GitLab, they publish all of their kind of values and guiding principles. Amazon has very famously created their set of leadership principles, and I think, Chika, you landed on a really important point here, which is, you need to be very explicit, as a company about, how do we make decisions? How do we think? What do we value? Are we, placing, speed, over, over risk taking? Are we operating more conservatively? Do we want to get collective buy-in on data before we make a decision, or do we want to empower people to take those risks? I think encoding that into the fabric of the company and making it clear for everybody, so they know, like, yeah, this goes very nicely with the way we operate, or no, this kind of violates the fundamentals of how we like to operate. I think it's so important. So I think a really great call out to share with everybody. And I'm curious, Andrea, I see you unmuting there, which is awesome. I can see kind of who's getting ready to chat. Yeah, what's been your experience with this?
It's kind of funny, actually, that if you think about us having been around a table, there's no way to truly know who wants to talk when. So the unmute part is kind of fun. I was just thinking about what Chika said and made me think about purpose, and how purpose is also something that people scoff at, unfortunately. And I mean, there's studies that are done. I think there was one a year or two ago about how 85% of the workforce is, disengaged from their work. And so kind of makes me wonder if you guys think that purpose is going to have a resurgence and companies will think differently about what it means to give their employees purpose. Yeah, I'll just ask that.
Yeah, to quickly jump in, I certainly agree. I think things like values and purpose are going to become increasingly important differentiators, because companies have fewer things to hide behind as they start to shift to fully or partially remote organizations. It's like you can woo people with, we've got this gorgeous cafeteria and delicious free food, and we've got fridges stocked with Red Bull, that you can drink until your heart explodes, and it's like, those things can be enticing, but of course, if you no longer have those, it's like, what do you have? And it's like, you've got your principles, you've got your values, you've got your purpose, you've got the humanity of your organization. All this stuff that could be smoke screened pretty effectively with glamorous offices.
Yeah, something I want to touch on that, which is something that that this has given, I think, organizations at a macro level, as well as like individuals, like an opportunity to sort of show their true colors. Like, I think something that I've appreciated a lot about the leadership that I've experienced is just the comms around, and some of the things we've touched on is just like the balance and like the health forward. Like, we've gotten days off, we've been, giving communication around like making sure that you're taking the time, because this is difficult. It is odd. You don't have like the resources and the tangibility. Maybe you're alone, maybe you're in a tight working space. Like, there's so many, you have children, there's so many different things. So I think being like honest to the fact that it is difficult and there's going to be a time to adapt, and like to Andrea's point, even something as simple as like a chair and a good work environment. I think those small nuances to like remove that concern, and remove that additional stress of like, oh man, I'm on my couch and it's uncomfortable, and like I can't, I don't know where to take a call. Like, I think fundamentally that there's kind of two sides. There's one, the structure of like, okay, like, do you have the tools you can have, that you need in order to execute your role and your responsibilities? And then it's like the genuine human side of like saying, hey, look, I hear you, I see you, this isn't easy, even with all that stuff, and helping sort of manage the expectations for that work. And candidly, I'd say that's one of the areas that maybe I've struggled with the most, is that because we're at home and because you know, like we can maybe quickly jump on or whatever. It's like making sure you create some boundaries and guidelines even for yourself of saying, okay, hey, like I'm gonna, you know, every day, like maybe I start earlier, but I'm gonna try to stop at 5 or 6 or whatever that timing is. And as long as you're communicating that, like the response and the understanding is there. It's just a matter of creating those guidelines for yourself so that like you don't feel like as much as work and life right now is kind of the same. Putting some effort towards like dividing those a little bit, I think can go a long way towards your health and also effectiveness.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you bring up a really important point, Jose, which I always feel is under discussed, and one way or another finds its way into all of these conversations, which is boundaries. You know, and I think obviously when you're in an office, the establishment of boundaries is pretty obvious. You know, it's like you're plugging in, you're arriving in a building, you're sitting in a chair. That's where you get your work done. Obviously, when you're working at home, you don't have those things. And something that I've really tried to kind of both practice and preach, you know, is how can you create some of these boundaries to avoid burnout, you know, in your personal practice. And one really practical one that I like to share and encourage is if you are working from home, always question whether or not you need notifications. Always question whether or not you should have an app on your phone, for instance. You know, I had a friend who once he learned that I didn't have my work email on my phone. He was like stunned. He's like, oh my God, how do you not have your work email on your phone? You know, and my answer is very simple. I was like, I work at home. So my laptop is always within 15 feet of me. So I can access my email there. But it's unhealthy for me to carry my email in my pocket when I do leave home, you know, when I do go to the grocery store or when I am kind of enjoying myself on the weekends. You know, it doesn't need to be there and it shouldn't be there. And that's kind of one of my practical ways to establish that boundary. So I'm curious for you guys, kind of how you've found like little details like that in your lives to create these kind of clear boundaries and, you know, prevent yourself from kind of always being on the clock. You know, Jose, as you mentioned, it can be so easy to end up finding yourself just working, you know, from 8 in the morning till 9 at night, and you're like, oh, I didn't give myself any time.
Yeah, to chime in there, you know, for me, working from home actually creates way more boundaries and far less distractions. For my organization, we worked in a complete open floor plan. And I know it's like the hip cool thing to do, or at least it was, but I think what a lot of research has shown, and what I certainly experienced, is it's actually really distracting when you don't have the old school cubicle where you have the walls of separation. It just kind of invites so much, like, just come and talk to me at any point. So working from home is actually far more productive for me personally. And just to chime in though on how do you respect other people's boundaries, yet at the same time engage with your colleagues in a way that tries to create a sense of normalcy. I've been having a couple of brainstorm sessions with colleagues still. It's not too formal. We're not using any like Neurally or like a fancy whiteboarding tool or anything like that. But a colleague who I might normally have a chat with when we run into each other, like once a month maybe, when we're both in the office at the same time, we're now doing it scheduled, you know, every other week, which has been really nice. I mean, it could be 30 minutes or even shorter, trying to gauge the person's interest, availability, how the conversation's going, and cushioning enough time to let it go longer if it's a good session, and trying to make it as natural as can be, specifically for folks who are a bit more outgoing or extrovert, not outgoing, but extrovert, and who really enjoy like the face-to-face interaction.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that, you know, having time that's just like scheduled. And so then you know that you're going to be able to talk to them at some point, and it doesn't kind of just go on and you don't talk to them for a while. So that's a good one. And I have been doing the same, just kind of having meetings on the calendar. Maybe if it's a person who I would generally just walk over to, you know, I could just call them on Slack, let's say, or call them directly. And, you know, we all made sure that our phone numbers are on Slack, so we could just kind of call each other up instead of walking over to each other's desk. But I would say that I was pretty unhealthy about it at first, to the point that I would just go straight through dinner. And then my manager ended up telling me, like, you don't need to do that. Like, you don't need to keep your boyfriend waiting for dinner until 9 p.m. Like, nothing is that important. And make sure you give yourself time for dinner. And so I put on my calendar, like, dinner in this, like, I gave myself 2 hours just to really be able to decompress, enjoy time together, and then maybe get back to work afterwards. And so that has been really good because it reminds me every day, like, okay, stop working at this time, nothing scheduled. Then another thing was also my manager telling me, like, I want you all to take a day off and make sure, or take a couple days off, like however much you need to, just to make sure you have that boundary. And so I think that a company kind of recommending that directly is really helpful. And then I just, scheduled things like during the day as well to, like, go for a run, go outside, and make sure that time doesn't get blocked off. And then the last thing that we've started is making sure that, it's easy to make meetings go back to back to back. And instead of having it be like the full 30 or the full 60, have it be like 25 or have it be 55. And that way everyone can have at least some time to just decompress for a sec, get some water, stand up. So that has also been really good.
Absolutely. No, it's a really excellent point. And Liz, you kind of bring up a topic which I think is important in that kind of boundary discussion, which is you also kind of want to, like, wrap certain relationships up or certain collaborations up, within a kind of nice container, that might come in the form of a regimented meeting. And, I feel like meeting becomes kind of a 4-letter word for so many people, in so many companies, but it is, of course, important, and one of the ways that I've found that to be successful in my workflow is like our head of product, him and I don't work directly together as far as, like, our roles are concerned, but there's a ton of work that we need to do together to drive the company forward. So rather than, kind of assaulting him with, like, drive-by feedback or, random information where I, like, text him or call him, or, like, we have just a dedicated standing meeting, and we'll touch base with each other using that time every week. And sometimes we're busy. Sometimes we don't need it, and we can quickly just have a quick chat through, Slack and say, like, hey, do we need to use this meeting today? Or is it better for you to keep jamming on whatever it is you're working on? And bounding it like that has been so incredibly productive for us. Chica, I can see you chatting here.
Yeah, no, one of the things that has been helpful on our end as a product team is actually just giving people flow time. So, let's say, power hour for, 4 hours. So 3 to 4 hours, schedule. Nobody's going to try to get you into a meeting. No one's going to try to, interrupt you. And if someone's reaching out, it's an emergency situation. But these 3 to 4 hours of your time are your time to work uninterrupted. And then we normally, ideally, we try to get most meetings done in the morning, but you know how it goes. But giving that delineation in the day so that, at least let's try to run through meetings as much as we can in the morning, and then give everyone their afternoons to get the work done. Helps kind of split the day into two. And then it also gives people the time to really focus on what they need without having interruptions. And if there are interruptions, we all know that things happen, but at least that's kind of the baseline that we all operate from.
Yeah, such an excellent point. Such an excellent point. So seeing that we're running towards the end of this, there's one thing I definitely want to make sure we get to before time runs out. Although we have kind of touched on it in a lot of ways. And this was inspired by a conversation I had with Andrea, actually, which is this idea of finding ways to engineer kind of moments of serendipity into the workflow. Andrea, I'll let you kind of tell the story, but it was you overhearing an opportunity to be a part of moderating something. And yeah. I'd love for you to kind of tell that quick anecdote, and then we should chat about kind of how can companies look to cook these moments into their operations.
Yeah, so Liz is going to like this story because it relates to blockchain. So not exactly, there were cryptocurrency companies on the panel as well. It was blockchain and cryptocurrency. And so this was a few roles back, but the particular story, but in general, I feel like, people get projects in two ways. One way is from your manager directly, and the other way is from overhearing colleagues talk about something and chiming in. And I feel like, if you just wait for your manager to give you a project, how do you know that they're giving you projects that align with you? And how do we make sure that, your manager is just not privy to things that would be really relevant for you in terms of developing your careers, leveraging your skills, your interests, etc. So with prior roles back, I had an interest in blockchain. I would like read about it, write articles about it, and I took a course as well. And then the company I was working at had a fintech event, and when I overheard just a couple of senior managers talking about, well, who's going to moderate this panel? I was like, I literally put my hand up and I was like, me. And if I hadn't been, nearby or in the room to hear them say that, I wouldn't have had a reason to have been in the meeting, and I wouldn't have had a reason to have known that they had this opportunity. And so a concern for me is about companies being open to making sure that the talents of all of their employees are leveraged, and to make sure for the employees to know that they have access to all of the projects that are relevant for them. And one way that, at Eightfold, it's not a plug, it's just kind of saying in general, something that we've kind of observed and tried to do about it is we've launched a project marketplace. And it's something that, it's part of the talent management solution that we offer to customers, and it enables the companies to say, okay, we're going to have this platform, the talent marketplace, available so that if someone is looking to make a project available, they can post it with skills, with the description, and then have it be available to the whole organization. So let's say I go on and I see, oh, there's a blockchain project. Maybe my manager doesn't know I like blockchain because it doesn't relate specifically to my job, but I could be a really good fit there because I have that knowledge. And so that's one way, but I feel like another way is just like Slack channels. But I'm curious what you all think in terms of if you've had that experience, like have your projects come from overhearing things, and how do we maintain that kind of dynamic?
I really love that example. It's a great one. And I'm definitely more of the latter for the most part, like always wanting to jump on new projects and keep myself kind of challenged and interested. So I love that you shared it. This is probably something most people are not going to want to do. And I really didn't want to do it either when we first went remote. But we do a daily stand-up every single morning at the top of the day, which is the worst because it's like, couldn't I have like a couple more hours to like get going before we had to jump right in? But honestly, it's super helpful. We're a small team, and for developers, honestly, and designers, it's probably not as useful if you're doing the same kind of like, say you're working on the same thing for a full week or 2 weeks, it's probably not always going to be as useful. But for my role, anyone that's like on the partnership side, when you're constantly talking to new folks, hearing who people are talking to, the projects that they're pitching, anything like that, to hear it constantly is really, really helpful. And so it's really allowed us every single day to stay up to speed with what everyone else is doing. It's been helpful. Despite my not wanting to do it, it's helpful.
It's an excellent point.
I would echo that sentiment of like something that we've found some success in. We have more of like a weekly, but just like sharing like little moments of success or learnings, or like just giving. I mean, I've sort of always advocated for this kind of nuance, but like I would always want to see like what my colleagues in the same role are doing with their clients. Like what is that little, because like it almost like if something has worked for somebody else, like there's almost always something you can borrow from that. So like having kind of like a sharing forward culture of like, hey, like we learned this, or maybe this didn't go so well, but like, this is just something for the group to know, because to advocate for that kind of group learning can really help streamline and also inspire a little bit of how to collaborate and think about your own challenges.
Yeah, I don't know. I definitely echo the coach. The sharing across groups is super important for opportunities to learn, and then also opportunities to support. It's with product management, we kind of have a lot of things in place. As a product manager, you kind of have a lot of things in place to help do that. So we have our stand-ups that we do anyways, but anyone's invited to them, and then those stand-ups have to be reported anyways. We have other things that are part of like the agile kind of process that bring people in on retrospectives, or you bring people in on sprint planning. All of those things are opportunities for people to kind of jump in and see where they can play in, and everything's always being reported out. So I think if there's anything, there's a lot of frameworks in place right now that you're starting to see a lot of teams take some of these relics and actually apply them apply them to their everyday, execution. There's definitely a lot of them out there. I found using a lot of the product management frameworks outside of the context of product management to be really helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. One thing I've discovered, and I learned this actually from a conversation with somebody at GitLab who are just tremendous at running remote really, really well. And it's so simple, yet I think something that most people don't do very well with. And the secret trick is proactively discourage, especially on Slack, and things like this, proactively discourage one-to-one communication wherever possible. And what I mean by this is it can be so incredibly easy to find yourself in a context sharing moment or a brainstorming session on Slack DM or on an email or something where it's all of a sudden, for instance, Chika and I might hatch this really interesting idea or strategy, and it's just between the two of us, and it doesn't end up getting shared or generating an awareness with the team until we proactively be oh, hey, by the way, we had this conversation. So operationalizing that, I think it's a valuable trick to get everyone to kind of cook into their workflow, which is always asking yourself, would this benefit somebody else, and should it belong in a more public channel or in a group chat or something like that, so that you don't kind of accidentally silo all of this information. So in my personal kind of work habits, it's I cruise through my chats on Slack, and it's oh, I don't have very many one-on-one chats with our leadership or my colleagues, and I see that as a good thing, where it's yeah, we're only having very personal conversations in those channels, where it is naturally a one-to-one thing, and wherever there's actually discussion of business or strategy or product, we're merging that into a channel where others can overhear it. And I think that creates these moments of collaboration and opportunity that can so easily get lost. So looking at the clock here, this was my fear, and it was a good fear, that we would kind of so easily kind of run over time, with so little time to spare. So to kind of wrap things up, I think kind of the topics we've touched on here that I think are really great takeaways, is the importance of kind of establishing frameworks so that you can back away from them for autonomy rather than back into them. Don't let people get kind of just lost in, ambiguous, workflow. I think it's the importance of intentionality and recognizing so many things that might happen through serendipity or accident in an office, are not going to happen that way in a remote setting. So how can you engineer these things, as managers and leaders, thinking really clearly about, how can we share information and make sure it spreads, more proactively and more effectively? And, how can you be inclusive of people that might not necessarily fall straight into the scope of the meeting? I think all of these things are important. So to sign off, I'd love to just kind of go down the line. Andrea, Jose, Chika, then Liz. If you guys want to kind of share one parting thought, or one kind of tip, or what would you kind of love, the listeners, both on the live as well as on the recording into the future, what would you like to have them think about as they embrace remote work?
Yeah, thanks, Jackson. So, go ahead, Jose.
Right,
Beat me to it.
Cool. I was just going to say, at a basic level, just kind of just be easy on yourself. We're all kind of going through it, and we're all going to find our ways to adapt to this, and ultimately we will. So just kind of trust that we're all in it together, and we'll make it out the right way.
Absolutely.
Definitely agree with that. Give yourself a chance to breathe, smile, enjoy getting to know your colleagues as people, and help that, humanized experience kind of translate over into your work. Participate in, getting to know them, and don't let the perception of the screen inhibit relationships, because there's a lot of opportunity here for when we are remote, as well as, when we meet in person.
Absolutely. Chika.
Yeah, I think Andrea and Jose are hitting it on the nail, hitting the head on the nail. I would say, I would just say continue, There's no playbook. We're all trying to figure it out. But we have to be deliberate about figuring out what works, figuring out what doesn't work, and just continue to improve. That's how we're going to find the type of remote experience that works for our organizations.
Fantastic. And Liz, wrap us up here. Take us home.
Well, I think everyone at the end of the day is going to figure out what processes and systems work for them. But I encourage everyone to follow Jose's advice on Cocktail Courier for one, but two, to try to make the environment as playful and as fun as possible. I mean, this is where you're dedicating so much of your time, and to try to make it a little bit lighter on yourself and your colleagues in whatever creative way you can, I think is a win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank everybody, everyone that's been listening. Certainly our panelists. It's been a real honor kind of having an hour and then some of your time. So thanks for joining us. Want to quickly kind of shout out kind of what our next event is going to be. You can expect to tune in August 6th, where we'll be having another interesting discussion, talking about some of the challenges of relationship building and sales in a remote world. We'll touch on some of the things that Jose brought up and go much deeper. So thanks again, everybody, for your time. I'll look forward to seeing you on the next one, and wish you all the best of luck in your remote practices. And of course, you can reach out to me and any of our panelists on Twitter and LinkedIn. Many of you probably have my email. I'm always happy to talk about these challenges and to help anybody do this better and do it with less stress. So until next time, we'll see you.